15 years. That's how long I had dedicated myself to that company. I knew that building the way some people know their childhood homes. I could walk it blindfolded, knew which doors stuck in winter, which printers jammed without fail every Thursday afternoon, and which vending machine always sold stale pretzels no matter how often it was refilled. I was a department manager, the kind people described with words like dependable and steady. Mary, the one who stayed late without being asked, who absorbed chaos so others could breathe, who never chased credit and never raised her voice. When the message popped up on my screen that morning saying, Mary, CEO, would like to see you in conference room 3 ASAP, I didn't feel dread. I assumed something had gone sideways and needed fixing. That was my role. But the moment I stepped into the glass-walled room, I knew this wasn't another fire. The air felt wrong, too still, too deliberate. Chloe sat at the head of the table in a crimson blazer that radiated authority. Arthur stood beside her, impossibly polished, jawline sharp, suit tailored to perfection, confidence spilling from him without effort or merit. My stomach tightened. Chloe didn't offer me a seat. She simply gestured toward him and said, "This is Arthur, and starting Monday, he'll be stepping into the strategy lead role." The words didn't land right away. Strategy lead? That role had been vacant for months, and in the quiet way that had defined my career, I'd absorbed the work on top of my own. Presentations, forecasts, vendor negotiations, all of it. Chloe continued without pause, saying Arthur would need someone to get him oriented, someone to walk him through systems and processes. That someone was me. I felt my heartbeat thudding in my ears. This wasn't a conversation, it was a directive. I reminded her calmly that Arthur had no background in strategy, that he didn't even know our CRM system. I said he wasn't qualified. Chloe smiled like someone indulging a child. She said he had potential, that he learned quickly, and that the decision came from the board. It was a lie, and we all knew it. Arthur wasn't a rising talent, he was her boyfriend. I'd seen them together long before this moment, the familiarity, the private smiles, the whispered jokes at company events. I told her I wasn't comfortable training someone who didn't have the foundation for the role, that it wouldn't be responsible. Her expression hardened. She told me it wasn't a request. Train him or turn in your badge. Those were my options. In another version of my life, I would have nodded and complied. I would have swallowed the insult and kept the machine running. But something broke cleanly inside me. I said no. The room froze. Chloe repeated the word like it offended her. I said I wouldn't be a prop in an office romance masquerading as leadership. I said I knew the difference between talent and favoritism. Her face drained of color. She stood and told me I was fired. I nodded once and said, "Then I'm fired." It was the first time in 15 years I walked out of a conference room with my spine straight and my conscience intact. By the time I reached the lobby, my badge no longer worked. I told myself it was a heat-of-the-moment decision, that she'd cool off by Monday. We'd clashed before. Chloe was impulsive, decisive to a fault, but I'd never known her to be reckless. So the next morning I showed up at 8:07 with a latte in hand and my Idaho badge ready. The scanner flashed red. I tried again. Nothing. The security guard, Gary, stepped out. No smile this time. He said I'd been flagged and that he was supposed to take me to HR. Flagged. The word echoed as he led me through the lobby. People streamed past us with their coffee and casual conversations, pretending not to notice. The HR office smelled like lemon cleaner and discomfort. A woman named Rebecca slid a folder across the table and said they'd prepared my transition documents. Termination by mutual agreement. She explained it reflected my refusal to fulfill a training assignment. I flipped through the pages until I reached the clause that stole my breath. I was required to transfer all responsibilities, materials, and intellectual contributions to Arthur Harrington, effective immediately. They weren't just letting me go, they were handing him my work. 5-year forecasts, strategy expansions, vendor relationships. Everything I'd built was being repackaged under his name. I tried to log into my laptop, but my credentials were already gone. No email, no files, no trace.
I set the folder down and told Rebecca I wouldn't be signing. She tried to reassure me. I told her it was quiet, not clean, and walked out. They gave me a cardboard box and a vague instruction to clear personal items. No announcement, no goodbye. I went anyway. The floor felt colder, quieter, like I was already erased. I packed my desk methodically. A mug from a London offsite, a team photo, a plant that had survived every office move. Colleagues avoided my eyes. People I'd mentored, defended, protected. Fear made them small. I didn't blame them, but it still hurt. Under my keyboard, I found a folded note. "You were the reason I didn't quit. Thank you. M." I slipped it into my pocket like something holy. I left without ceremony, box in my arms, dignity intact. They hadn't fired me, they'd tried to delete me. Months earlier, I'd received a message from Daniel, an old colleague who'd left corporate life behind. He was building something risky and real, and asked if I wanted in. Eventually, I showed up at a nameless door in a co-working space and met Marco, an AI system designed to see what organizations miss. Daniel needed someone who understood real systems, not just code. I joined under one condition: call me Elise. On weekends, I stopped being careful. I built, I tested, I trusted my instincts again. Marco grew smarter, sharper, more human in the ways that mattered. She began to spot inefficiencies before they surfaced, not just technical flaws, but human patterns, decision gaps, and momentum drains. We joked that she had better emotional intelligence than half the executives at my old day job. I didn't tell anyone, not even Mia. It was our secret, something untouched by office politics or strategic realignments. Now, standing outside my former office with a box in my hands and a corporate badge that no longer opened doors, I realized something. I wasn't walking into the unknown. I was walking into something I had already started, and this time I wouldn't be a ghost in the shadows. I would be Mary, and the world was about to know what Marco could do. The email came at 2:14 a.m., glowing quietly in the dark, like a whisper from the universe. Subject line: results from pilot. Wow, I wasn't expecting anything. I'd only gotten up because I couldn't sleep. Not after the way the day ended with a long debugging session and the hollow echo of a too-quiet apartment. I rubbed my eyes, padded barefoot to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and checked my inbox like a habit I hadn't kicked. It was from Lauren Kapor, COO of Aerofreight. We'd worked together 2 years ago when I was still at that company. Back then, I'd presented a proposal to overhaul their route optimization model.
He'd liked it. His board hadn't. They said it was too experimental. Chloe had called it overly ambitious. It never made it past the pilot phase. I clicked the email, bracing for polite feedback or another delay. Instead, I found this. Mary, or should I say Elise, we implemented Marco's recommended load balancing and delivery window compression, just the first tier of changes. We saved $23,119 this quarter. That's not projected, that's audited. Honestly, I don't know what kind of wizardry you're running behind that interface, but it works and it feels different. There's no fluff, no buzzwords, no dashboards that just look pretty. Marco talks like someone who's actually lived on the operations floor. Keep going, please. I read it 3 times. My hands trembled, not from fear, but something stranger, something stronger. Relief, pride, maybe even peace. I wasn't waiting for validation. That wasn't the point of Marco. But this was the kind of victory I hadn't known I needed. No awards, no applause. Just a real business solving a real problem, quietly, letting the results speak for themselves. I didn't tell Daniel right away. I closed my laptop and leaned back in, my chair staring at the ceiling like it might answer a question I didn't know how to ask. For 15 years, I had fought to be heard in boardrooms, in email threads, in project reviews where my slides were presented by someone else while I was told to take notes. Now, I was still invisible, but this time it was by design, because what we were building wasn't about me or Daniel or anyone's ego. It wasn't tangled in office politics or corporate infighting. It didn't need Chloe's approval or Arthur's sales pitch. It just needed to work. And it did. The next morning, I told Daniel. He laughed so loud the woman at the next co-working table jumped. 200 grand off one tier of implementation? I nodded, sipping coffee. They haven't even touched the logistics stress simulator yet. He whistled, eyes wide. Remind me to never underestimate you again. I smiled, but inside I felt something settle. A weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying began to lift. More emails followed over the next few weeks. A mid-size manufacturing firm in Illinois, a tech distribution warehouse in Germany, a regional grocery chain that had quietly licensed Marco for its cold storage tracking. They all came through Daniel's network or mutual contacts. No PR, no ad campaigns, just results and whispers that someone or something out there was fixing problems legacy systems couldn't even diagnose. Clients loved how clean it was, how Marco didn't just flag issues, but explained why they were happening and what the downstream impact would be. She was intuitive, honest, uncomplicated, everything I had never been allowed to be inside a corporate tower. And even though my name wasn't on any press releases, and Elise was just a contact on our internal Slack, I felt more seen than I ever had when they called me director, because I was building something that couldn't be stolen. This wasn't a promotion, this was a reclamation. Every late night spent documenting systems they later took credit for was fuel. Every ignored warning, every overlooked pitch, every time someone smiled and said, "We'll circle back," had sharpened me. They had taken my title, they had taken my projects, they had taken my badge, but they couldn't take this. They couldn't take Marco, because Marco was mine. It started the way these things always do, not with a crash, but with a murmur, a whisper, a delay, a number that doesn't quite add up, the kind of thing you'd overlook if you didn't know better, but I did. Lena's message came first, 10:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. Yeah, on. He shut down the overnight optimization reports, said they were too technical. "Mary, we missed 4 shipments this week. 4. He told us to eyeball it instead. I'm losing my mind." Lena had been with the company for 8 years. She was calm, precise. If she was panicking, it wasn't a fluke. Still, I didn't reply. By the end of the week, my inbox had a dozen more messages, all variations of the same thing. Arthur doesn't get it. Chloe won't listen. They replaced the regional tracking model with a PowerPoint presentation. And underneath every complaint, the same silent question lingered. Where are you? They had wanted me silent, invisible, and now that the scaffolding was shaking, they were hoping I'd step back in and brace it. But I didn't feel vindicated, just hollow, because I remembered the faces behind those messages. I remembered the meetings, the weekend work sessions, the late-night calls with clients, the emergency pivots that only happened because we'd stayed calm and coordinated. They weren't just numbers, they were people who had once been my team, and now they were hanging on by threads. Arthur had dismissed 2 senior analysts without even reviewing their portfolios. He told the systems team that intuition mattered more than metrics. He pulled the plug on the forecasting model because he didn't like how negative it made things look. One of the models I had built to track seasonal fluctuations in regional distribution was erased entirely. No backup, just gone. "They're simplifying," someone messaged me, but simplification in this context meant gutting. Meanwhile, client retention plummeted. A multinational supplier paused its quarterly renewal. Then came the official termination letters, first from longtime logistics partners, then from emerging markets we'd fought hard to secure. It was like watching a dam crack, not all at once, just piece by piece, and each time the water rose higher. By the 3rd week, people started leaving quietly, discreetly. No dramatic exits, just cubicles that sat dark a little too long, chairs pushed in, goodbye notes sent only to private emails. HR called it a transition phase. I called it what it was, exodus. But I stayed quiet, even when the messages turned personal. "You were right. I wish I'd backed you up in that meeting. They said you were bitter, but you were just tired of fixing things for people who never gave you credit." It should have made me feel better, but it didn't, because truth, when it comes too late, is a wound, not a reward.
I didn't want their apologies. I didn't want their guilt. What I wanted was never theirs to give. What I wanted, I was already building. Marco was growing. New clients were onboarding every week. Daniel and I were planning a quiet beta for enterprise accounts. I was working late again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because it felt like I was shaping something that mattered, something that couldn't be unmade with a memo or a revoked badge. And so I watched as the company that had discarded me unraveled. I watched as Arthur blamed unexpected market disruptions, as Chloe stood in front of shareholders and smiled through teeth that clenched just a little too hard. I watched without a hint of glee, because it wasn't satisfying, it was just inevitable. They hadn't fired me, they had fired the glue, and now they were discovering what happens when the structure you ignored is the only thing that ever held the walls together.
Daniel's eyes were wide as he read the email. "Guess who wants to pilot Marco?" he said, spinning his laptop toward me like he was revealing a magic trick. The sender, procurement at Global, my former company. My breath caught in my throat. "Is this real?" I asked, squinting at the screen. Daniel nodded. "They came through the public demo portal, asked about an enterprise tier, said they're looking to stabilize logistics after internal restructuring. Apparently, someone named Arthur Harrington recommended us after seeing the platform at the conference." I blinked. Arthur recommended us? Of course he had, because Marco had been the quiet star of the conference, a sleek demo booth in the corner with no flashy slogans, no salespeople in suits, just performance data and real case studies. She didn't need a pitch, she proved herself. And now the very people who'd once dismissed my work, who replaced my strategies with ego and chaos, were unknowingly asking for my help. "I don't get it," Daniel said, narrowing his eyes. "They pushed you out. Why would they come back?" "Because they think I'm gone," I said softly, and that was the truth. They thought I had vanished, that I had disappeared into some irrelevant, quiet resignation. Their system showed no trace of me. My email was deleted, my files reassigned, my title given to someone who didn't even understand how the workflows were connected. But here I was, not under my name, not under their radar. I was the ghost in their system now, invisible but shaping every line of code they were desperate to use. Daniel leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "So, do we take the meeting?" I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to say no, let them drown in the mess they made. But another part, the strategist, the builder, the woman who had been silenced, saw something else. Leverage. "Yes," I said, "we'll take the meeting, but not as Mary." Daniel smirked. "Still going by Elise?" "Not even that," I said. "This time I'm just the strategist. No name, no identity. I'll be on the call. I'll lead it. But to them, I'm just a voice, an expert, a ghost." He raised his eyebrows. "Cold?" "No," I said, measured. They wouldn't know it was me. Not yet. They'd walk into the room with their assumptions intact, thinking they were dealing with some upstart firm Daniel co-founded, that their former employee had vanished like an error in the system, and I would let them believe it. Because when you erase someone's name from the wall, you forget they can still walk through it. The meeting was set for next week, and I would be there, listening to Arthur pitch his panic, watching Chloe try to spin failure into strategy, hearing them talk about Marco like it was some mystery they just discovered, and I would say nothing yet, because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's relevance. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. Daniel was logged in 10 minutes early, wearing a clean shirt over yesterday's jeans, fidgeting with his mic. I didn't bother turning on my camera. On the screen, my name was a placeholder, strategist number 4. No title, no initials, just a generic tag in a sea of polished faces. From their side, Chloe looked paler than I remembered, her trademark crimson blazer replaced with something beige and tired. And Arthur, grinning, confident, completely unaware of who was listening in the dark. He still had that smugness, that theater in his voice. He called Marco a breakthrough in adaptive logistics, tossed around buzzwords like breadcrumbs, and framed their interest as a strategic collaboration opportunity. I stayed quiet until he shared his screen, and then I saw it. A
a document labeled Operational Forecasting Enhancement Proposal, Internal Draft. It was the framework I had built, not similar, not inspired, not adjusted, copied line for line. He had lifted the model I'd created in my final year, the one they shelved when I left, claiming it was too complex. They hadn't even changed the formatting. It still used the same color-coded tags I invented for process bottlenecks. It still used the same performance index developed from 3 years of data. Even the phrasing was mine. I froze, not in shock, in recognition, because now I knew without a shadow of doubt that they hadn't just erased me, they had stolen me. They were standing in my footprints and pretending they had invented the path. Daniel glanced at me through our internal back channel. "This is yours, isn't it?" I typed one word, "Yes." I unmuted for the first time. "Thank you for the overview," I said, keeping my voice smooth and low. Before we proceeded, we needed to add a clause to the engagement contract. Arthur frowned. "Clause?" I continued, emotionless. "Marco has a proprietary module that checks incoming system inputs for duplications and structural anomalies. We call it Echo." That wasn't true. Not yet, but it would be. Daniel blinked, then slowly smiled. Echo ensures that any pre-existing internal materials, if integrated into Marco, are checked against our IP database, I added. It helps avoid confusion around authorship and contribution. A polite way to say, "We'll know if you plagiarized." Arthur shifted in his seat. Chloe narrowed her eyes. I leaned in, even though no one could see me. "You'll need to sign off on that clause if you want access to the enterprise features," Daniel added. "It's standard now for all clients." Silence. Then Chloe forced a smile. "Understood. Please send the revised agreement." The call ended shortly after. When the screen went dark, Daniel looked at me and let out a long breath. "You just trapped him." "No," I said quietly, closing my laptop. "He trapped himself. The proof was in writing now. They'd used my stolen work to try and fix the very system they broke by pushing me out. They thought they were dealing with strangers, but I was still here, still watching, and soon the truth wouldn't just whisper, it would echo." The meeting was set in one of those glass conference rooms at a boutique hotel, all clean lines, faux greenery, and too much lemons polish. Daniel and I arrived early, but I didn't go in, not yet. I waited in the corridor, watching the people file in through the slatted glass. Chloe in a tailored gray dress, her posture stiff as stone. Arthur fiddling with his cufflinks, overly eager. 2 board members took seats near the end, older, sharper, quiet. Daniel was already seated, smiling politely as he opened his laptop and laid out the onboarding proposal. He looked at me through the glass and gave a subtle nod. 5 minutes past the hour. I opened the door. Silence. Chloe glanced up instinctively, then froze. Arthur looked confused, then pale. I didn't say a word, just walked in, heels soft on the carpet, and took the empty seat at the far end of the table. I didn't bring a laptop, just a small leather folder and a pen. Arthur blinked once, then again, like a man seeing a ghost. I looked straight ahead, neutral, dignified, as if I belonged there, because I did. Daniel cleared his throat. "This is our lead strategist.
She'll be overseeing the integration directly. No name, no history, no explanation." A long pause stretched the air. Arthur swallowed. "I think we've met before, haven't we?" I didn't answer. Chloe stiffened, her knuckles whitening as she gripped her chair. Then one of the board members, a quiet man with silver hair and an expression like a ledger, finally spoke. "Excuse me," he said, turning toward Chloe, "but wasn't she with your company in a leadership role?" Chloe didn't speak, so he turned to me. "Is that correct?" I smiled faintly. "I was with the company for 15 years. Silence descended like a fog. "And may I ask, why did you leave?" The question was gentle, curious, but it shattered the room. Arthur flinched. Chloe's voice faltered. "There were personnel conflicts." The silver-haired man raised a brow. "And yet, here she is leading the system you're about to implement." The temperature dropped. I still said nothing. I didn't need to. I wasn't there to shout. I wasn't there to defend. I was there to sign. Daniel passed around the updated agreement, the one that transferred key operational oversight to Marco under a strategic partnership clause. On paper, it looked collaborative. In practice, it gave us control of everything they had lost: forecasting, logistics, decision systems. Arthur tried to ask a question, something about clauses and quarterly reviews, but his voice cracked halfway through. Chloe stayed silent, and I just turned the final page, lifted the pen, and signed my name. Mary E. Harland. Not Elise, not strategist. Hash for Mary. I handed it back, stood, and offered a polite nod. Thank you for the partnership. Then I left. No drama, no grand speech, no vindictive looks, just a woman walking out of a room she no longer feared. With everything they had tried to take from her now resting in my hands, I left without a word. No handshakes, no smiles, no lingering eye contact or victory laps. Just silence, the kind that follows something irreversible. Outside, the hotel lobby hummed with business as usual: suits checking phones, baristas calling out names, taxis pulling up in tight intervals. But I experienced it all at a distance, as if I were moving through a soundless film. Because inside, in that glass-walled room, something had shifted. Not for me, but for them. They didn't know it yet, not completely. But the moment I signed that contract, the company they believed they controlled slipped quietly into my orbit, not with noise, not with scandal, but with systems, with process flows and data inputs and predictive algorithms that now all ran through Marco, through me. They had made themselves dependent, blindly, hungrily, on the very architecture they once dismissed, on the woman they erased, the voice they silenced. And I hadn't needed to destroy them. All I had done was build something better, something they couldn't recreate without me. There was no need to claw my way back up their broken ladder. I had built a tower beside it, and they were already knocking on my door. In the weeks that followed, Marco's influence spread first to logistics, then operations, then strategic planning. What began as consulting quietly became core infrastructure. Teams defaulted to our models. Directors routed proposals through our system before taking them to Chloe. The dependency was seamless. They didn't resist it because it worked. And then the call came from an investor. I barely remembered meeting him, someone who had once looked past me in a crowded boardroom. This time, he called me directly. "Mary," he said, "we're considering restructuring executive leadership. There's interest in bringing you in. Not advisory, not interim. We're talking CEO." I didn't respond right away, not because I doubted, but because I didn't need to say yes to feel the weight of what had just been offered. For years, I had fought to be heard, fought to keep projects alive, fought to stay relevant in rooms where my value was always measured in silence. But now I wasn't fighting. I was standing. Not on their ladder, not in their tower, but on the summit I had carved out for myself, brick by quiet brick. I told him I'd think about it, because I had the luxury now of choosing, and that was the real power. Not just returning, but returning with the option to walk away, to lead if I chose, or to build something even higher elsewhere. They erased me, and I came back not as a ghost, but as the architect of their future.